Hello everybody. Today on our next chapter of the neck journey, we're going to examine the minutiae of getting the core together for this neck. So as a quick review, the way I've decided to make necks for my archtop guitars is an unusual combination of old materials, new materials, and some particularly old methods that are not in common use today, namely veneering a core of a neck. You can see on the outside this attractive veneer, which starts out as a thin piece that's bent across the grain that we looked into a little while ago. And then, of course, there's a regular fingerboard that's of the usual style, about 1/4 inch thick or 6 or 7 millimeters thick. Apart from the wooden neck core material, of course, I'm using some carbon fiber reinforcement and a little twig of wood that goes in here, but we'll get to that. For today, we're going to focus on how the neck core happens. Essentially, the end game is a neck core that looks like this, basically without features, just the shape of the neck, but a little smaller. It's got a nicely finished surface here because this surface ends up on the finished instrument, so this has to be perfect before the thing is all glued up. And then you can see here, this is a kind of a pattern that I use to get close with the veneer shape. But anyhow, this is the part we're going to talk about today, is the core. The way I like to make these is with Douglas fir, again, one of my favorite materials. Here's a pattern for the neck, including the headstock, and you can see it's oversized to facilitate cutting the way for the tuning pegs to go in. And so I'm going to use this larger oversized neck core pattern template here that adds a little material for safety when we're doing our roughing cuts. So here's a piece of nice, incredibly beautiful, ancient Douglas fir. And I think this stuff is being used for its highest purpose. I counted, it's about 300 grain lines across here, 300 years of growth, and you can see how beautifully quartered it is. So from that, I've made a bunch of blanks. First, there's a bandsaw jig that I'll demonstrate that saws the headstock angle to the right slope. And then I use the bandsaw to further dimension the neck to thickness. And then I use my little carving machine to get the volume of the neck and then clean it up by hand. Let me mention that there is an issue with grain orientation. I would prefer it if the grain lines on the edge of the neck, where you can see, were perpendicular-ish to the face of the neck, like this one is. I just think it's a handsome look, and of course it means that the neck core material is perfectly vertical grain, which gives you your best mechanical properties for any given piece of material. So in order to get this particular blank to come out like this, perfectly vertical grain, or as perfect as you could get, I had to do a couple of tricks. And what I did first was I cut the back of this part off axis. I removed a piece of material like this, which turned out to be 6 7/10 degrees. I removed that. I turned it into chips with a uniplane on this side. And then when I was happy with the relationship of this surface to the grain lines, then I went to the bandsaw and sawed off this scrap. which I then was able to measure it at this angle for your edification. Anyway, now I'll go back and put this back into the process, and this will convert nicely to a blank like this and get carved like this. So that's basically it. It's a pretty simple woodworking project, but I thought I'd walk you through it and show you the steps that this thing goes through. So we can see that we have vertical grain lines here, and then they kind of get squiggly, but anyway, really good. I think the best we can hope for. The wood has its own ideas about what straight grain is. Now you can see that it's twisted a little bit this way, whereas in this end, it's perfectly vertical. But that's the tree. Not much we can do about that. So now, I made this little fixture here to take care of this headstock angle. Just a simple sled. It has a piece of aluminum material that fits the slot on the table. So we can see that even though we used a 1/4-inch blade, because we have the guides set properly, and it's not a new blade, but sharp enough, you can see the quality of the surface is just fantastic. Nice and flat, and a super quality surface. So really you should think of the bandsaw as a precision tool. It certainly can be. Now I've left a little extra material here to plane off, which we'll do in the bench room with a hand plane to straighten this out and get it just the way we want it. here I have a simple drill jig that I made to drill 2 locating pins that I use to help fixture the neck while I'm building it. And we'll just use this and eyeball it to show the position of the nut. Okay. And we're going to use my trusty antique number 62 plane, which I love. This is a low angle plane, a lot like a block plane can be with a slow angle. But obviously this is about twice as long, and with the usual kind of big plane handles, and just does a lovely job. Of course, this is a dream planing job because we're going downhill on this lovely material. I love planing, and somehow seems like guitar making, at least the kind of guitar making that I do, doesn't have enough planing in it. So I'm always happy to be able to use the hand plane. The surface that you get from this is so extraordinary. Can you hear that? It is just amazing. It smells good too. I'm going to leave just a little bit extra so we can have a little bit to play with when we're all done. The thing is that this neck blank is about to go through a lot of processes, and you might get a ding or a little shop wear in the process. So I don't want to go all the way exactly to my finished surface here. Leave a little bit to clean up later after it's been laid up. That seems about right. We'll leave it alone and see. All right. So back to the bandsaw. Nothing really cuts better than this. Beautiful, beautiful material. With the neck core cut to rough shape on the bandsaw, we move to the carving duplicator to reduce the volume of the part and form the 3D neck shape. This setup on the duplicator uses two holes that were drilled on the fingerboard gluing surface of the neck core to align and hold the part on the table, and so register the work relative to the pattern. The pattern being followed is on the right side of the setup, where I stand to move the follower or stylus of the duplicator across the pattern. This one-to-one duplicator is designed so that the router bit exactly mimics the movement of the stylus and will cut a dimensionally perfect copy of the pattern in the neck blank. You'll notice that I have rigged up a pneumatic clamping system to immobilize the crosswise movement and advance the cutting path along the neck in a step and repeat motion so that only 2 of the 3 axes are free to move during the cut. This helps with accuracy because the bit is removing the same amount of material on each pass and will be much better behaved than if the bit were free to wander around and cut randomly. It's challenging to control the cutter in the best of circumstances, and this reliable way of limiting the movement to just 2 axes makes a big improvement in consistency. This process of tracing the form, stepping over, tracing the form, etc., repeats down the length of the part until the headstock is reached. The duplication step cuts the blank very nearly to its final shape, and next we'll bring it over to the bench to be refined by hand. All right, so here we are to take away the machine marks. The correct part is pretty much at the bottom of these machine marks, which is plain off the high spots, and leave a surface that'll be pretty much ready to use. Well, we'll clean it up a little bit with sandpaper, just because that's the kind of people we are. But honestly, it doesn't really matter. We're going to be bonding to this part with a very strong epoxy, which will not care whether the surface is smooth or not. Okay. And I see these pins have kind of gotten forced in a little bit. They're not engaging as much as they should, particularly this one. Okay. Might work better. One thing that is challenging about working with this material, it can be challenging, is the way it can tear if you're turning around the wrong way. When you're planing it, so be pretty careful of that. Anyway, so this just gets cleaned up with sandpaper. And it's a pretty quick job making this core, actually. Sure smells nice. Smells like Mr. Clean. Anyway, like that. So we'll clean it up with sandpaper and make it nice and smooth like this one. And then the next job will be to fit it and assemble it, or rather fit the veneer to the neck blank, cut the hole for the post, and assemble it in the mold, and we'll get there. So I also wanted to mention that I was curious as to what the weight of this was, and I took the trouble to measure it and weigh it carefully and determined that it weighs 31 pounds per cubic foot, which is right about what we'd expect. It's a kind of in the middle, I think, of the Douglas fir group of materials. Remember, we were saying it has quite a variety. There are 6 species, I believe. And then also, looking at this cutoff, we can see some evidence of the twist in this tree. This, of course, is almost square to the material. But if we look over here, it's tilted quite a bit more. So this would be more like this much, which is starting to get some real degrees there. And then just in this little 11-inch piece, if we turn this over and look at this, we'll see that it's twisted less on this edge. So just to show you that even in this short piece, the grain lines can change the orientation with some significance to the surface. Anyway, it ended up weighing 31 pounds a cubic foot, which is sort of a lightish density. That's 496 kilograms per cubic meter. So in our system, 31 pounds a cubic foot is in between the hardwoods and the softwoods that are light. So maple would be maybe 45 pounds a cubic foot or something like that. And then spruces, good light spruce that you'd build a top out of, would be below 25 pounds a cubic foot probably. Anyway, so that's about the size of it. Again, one more time, I love this material. It meets the requirements of the core beautifully well, not too heavy, very, very stiff. I mean, it really is impressive stiffness, particularly for its weight, but really it's just stiff. Anyhow, that's the core material.